Let me be very clear here. We never asked for the ICC prosecution office to not do their job, to just sit on their asses while journalists do their jobs for them. What we asked was for the character of these individuals who provide information to be provided in the court so that we can check their reliability. And I'm sorry for not relating to you before, but what happens here is that the standard of reliable proof for these individuals, when you reveal sources in the proceeding of a court, is basically simple. You can check for the character of that individuals. You can check that he's actually, for example, is really a military official and not some people claiming to be a military official, for instance. It also, for example, like you can check very simple information like where do these people live. For example, like if this account was from Srebrenica, but these people live in Banja Luka, for instance, then this evidence clearly is not very, very reliable, members of the House. So that is what we meant by standard of reliable proof, right? Okay. One basic question that they want here is that the role of evidence in criminal crime and how should the prosecution do this. Now, the standard that they approached was an extremely minimalist one. Get only the smallest amount of necessary evidence to convict individuals, right? This is why the prosecution office of the ICC is sufficient in their model to prove the crime or not of somebody. Members of the House, if I'm a prosecution and I do that, I will lose my job in approximately 2 minutes. Why? Because you don't know which one of your evidence is reliable, members of the House. Because you don't know which part of your evidence can be destroyed by the defendants, members of the House. Instead, your approach should be an extremely maximalist one. Gather every evidence possible for a case. Yes, yes.
The problem is you're not even going to get a starting point for this information when you don't let war journalists to tell you that facts that don't have credibility for you to even cross-check.
Starting information, that's very funny. I know, for example, that the judge jury are murdering people because people are running to check when they're getting murdered by the hundreds of thousands. I know, for example, that the Srebrenica is being shelled because it's very hard to close like several thousand kilometers square of an area from like TV cameras, members of the House. It's also because, for example, in the problem in Kosovo, for instance, that we have like allied airplanes actually gathering evidence as well to do so. Starting a point of evidence can always come from everywhere. Okay, the problem here with this analysis of this minimalist evidence also overlooks the problem with ICC fact-finding gathering. They say, for instance, that first I will say that ICC sometimes are unable to get these areas because these areas are already being tarnished and trampled, right? For example, in Serbia, what happens was that there is mass murder and then people are buried in the mass graves, members of the House. Now, when you have evidence of individuals who've seen people these mass graves in the first place, then it's very easy, for example, for you to show that. But the problem is that many of these mass graves have only been recently discovered, several years after the fact. It's very difficult to build your case if it takes that long to get evidence in the first place, members of the House. So the areas can be tarnished. Secondly, they say that, well, if that's not the case, then why don't we just go to the witnesses directly? The problem here is that this is distinctly inconsistent with their analysis that we are placing witnesses in danger. Because when those people have to be witnesses in the first place, the ICC also putting these individuals in danger. My question is that why are other witnesses who are gotten by the Office of the Prosecution of the ICC deemed capable of shouldering this risk, but those sources from the war journalists and the war journalists are deemed so special they cannot be put under any risk acceptable, members of the House. And we think that is very problematic. Okay, guess what?
The difference is that you're not giving a specific person. You're talking about the location where this happened or the part of government that is going to rule. You're not going to be directly making a person in danger.
Wrong. Simply, there is a lot of people. There is a lot of women evidence in Srebrenica who actually have to be witnesses in cases, right? There is also the case of the trial of the colonel in Rwanda right now, which has evidence of individuals who are actually witnessing their family being raped and murdered. Members of the House. Those people are also victims. Those people under their model is very inconsistently protected, members of the House. Thirdly, they say about this responsibility by these journalists to protect the sanctity of their sources. That because this information is not them to give, then therefore these individuals have to protect the sanctity of their information. And we say that your professional responsibility is never as strong as your legal responsibility to provide the society safety, members of the House. For example, if you are a doctor, the court can still give you an injunction of a subpoena to provide evidence, for example, to provide evidence if this is necessary for the prosecution of the criminal case, members of the House. Your responsibility as as a professional, it's a responsibility that happens to your job. On the other hand, your responsibility to stop crimes against humanity is your responsibility as a human being, members of the House. And we say that being a human being is much more important than being a war journalist. And we believe that is the case that we are very proud to stand on in these ideas, members of the House. Okay. What they want is a maximalist uncovering truth, a model that is available. For example, like Dennis say that we are not going to get info because these groups are closing information. First, they exaggerate the ability of the government to actually prevent individuals from war journalists to enter a country, members of the House. Look at, for example, the problem in Egypt, right? Foreign journalists were actually banned from entering Egypt when Tahrir Square was in a problem, and yet Al Jazeera was still there, and yet CNN was still there, members of the House, providing us day-by-day information of this kind of situation. Moreover, they also discount the possibility that social media might be the source, as is, for example, how Tonim used information from Twitter in order to update us with information in the outside country, members of the House. And thirdly, we say it's also many times it's very, very physically impossible for these individuals to prevent even things from happening when refugees start streaming outside your country, because the general control of these authoritarian regimes only extend towards the area. So information we still get. Now they say also that this is going to make sources lie. Newsflash, in courts, if you lie, you go to jail. That's called the crime of perjury. That's like basic thing. Okay, finally, also they say that sources will not come to war journalists, members of the House, because of this information. And yet, we have enormous numbers of individuals. There's a lot of motivations why people can come into war journalists. Sometimes because your conscience simply cannot hold that 300 people, 1,000 people are killed in the name of your country, members of the House. It's also sometimes because you don't like these individuals in the first place. Sometimes also because you have no future in that administration anyway and want to get out. So we are not afraid that information is going to come. Information are still going to come, members of the House. So, if we want to prove that people are guilty, if you want to make sure that the post-war is not littered by mass murderers, you vote for side proposition.